This is Lawrence Hayes. Today, we're starting our show with a very interesting and renowned person. This is Lawrence Hayes reporting from Morgan Carter, the Conversation Starter's home. The producer of Omnibus Roundtable, Power TV, Chicago Communicator newspaper, and those are just a few of the things that this gentleman does. We're going to look into his life today and find out how he got started, when he got started, and a few other things. So we're going to open up right now asking Mr. Carter to conversate with us about how did he get started in this business and where did the Conversation Starter name come from?
Well, let's go back to my childhood. I think it's very important for you to understand the people that try to bring you the news. And I want to stress that, I've said this before, bringing the news, particularly the black community, actually put us at great risk. We were threatened by the police. We're talking about police brutality. It's ironic that, since the late 80s, middle 80s, we're still talking about police brutality. We're still talking about cover-ups. We're still talking about intimidation.
Right.
And maybe let me just do a little of my childhood. I was born in Lansing, Michigan, which is the capital. My father was a chemist, and being a scientist at a very rare time, it was quite unusual to have a black scientist. My mother was a pioneer in social services, things that we take for granted now, like clothes closets and food pantries, were not really common in those days per se. And my mother worked for the city and also was a mental health activist. I don't know how she got into that. My father used to bring home scientists who studied the up-to-date, first-class health delivery system. My father was in charge of occupational health, and on a signature he could close a mine or a supermarket. He was federalized when I was a child. That meant that the Defense Department came and picked one person in each state to secretly monitor strontium-90. Strontium-90 is a byproduct of atomic testing. And we called them Russians then, what we call Soviets now. And my father was federalized under a secrecy oath to go up on the roof, and they had a thing that looked like a coffee filter, but actually they called in science a particulate catcher. And that's what it does, it catches particles. The issue was the Russians were doing testing that we couldn't control, we mean the U.S. And so they were trying to measure the extent of that radiation on North America, and particularly the United States and its possessions. So there was one person in each state who was federalized. And what would happen, I went with my father, he would take this thing downstairs, and it'd be a whole wall of computers that now would probably be a computer sit on a desk. They had the old-fashioned IBM cards. And he would analyze the amount of radioactivity, and then he would call a state policeman. And this is what they call the chain of evidence, I guess you might say. And he would seal this little chart in a lead tube and then solder it. Hand it to a state policeman. A state policeman would take it to the Air National Guard, and on Mondays, I believe it was Mondays, all of the states and all of the possession would fly those samples. So it's sort of like a crossword puzzle. You could actually see the pattern of radiation, around the states. And on my dad's dying bed, he held to his oath of secrecy, for which I was very proud. Now you ask, how did I get into television? I've always been a visual person, and one that wanted to describe what he saw. And if all the aptitude tests I took said that I wanted to be in helping professions. At the same time, I had a high gradient for science. And my great uncle, who was a minister, so I'm a preacher's nephew, not a preacher's kid, but I'm a preacher's nephew. His second wife said that someday I'd be a minister. And knowing what I know about what happens behind the pulpit, even at a young age, real young age, I said, oh, no. But I didn't understand that a ministry can be like yours, where you expose businesses to thousands of people.
Right.
A ministry can be like a very fine white gentleman from the northern suburbs who was a Christian, and he came to Lawndale, which at one time had the higher mortality rate than some third world countries. And this good-looking, big car driving, good smelling, well-dressed dentist would come in the heart of Lawndale and bring gold fillings, if I remember right, not the cheap stuff. And he would work on these teeth of these young kids. And I could see the puzzled look on these kids. Why are you here? Mm-hmm. We don't see many white people. What? You're rich. Where are you coming down here? Right. And he'd start out by saying, well, your teeth need fixing. Mm-hmm. And after that kind of calmed him down, he was do a message. Very quietly, went pushy. But that was his way of having a ministry. We knew a guy by the name of Charlie Harrington from Alabama, went to our church, worked for Packey Webb Ford, had a responsible position. I don't know much about cars, and I really don't want to. Mm-hmm. My brother Byron is just the opposite. He had them, worked on them, worked summers at the plant. Now he's a high-level General Motors executive, making cars. So I remember when the car industry and the big cars, everything was hot. I remember in the 60s and 70s, it was steak, taters, and tea. The economy was great. And I remember my dad said, let's go, me and my brother, and pick a new car. And my dad could buy cars at wholesale because one of his friend's son worked for General Motors. So anyway, we picked a car and loaded it with everything. One thing we didn't get was air conditioning. And I did not realize my father was dying and that he was good about insurance, so he made sure that the house and the car were covered. We had no probate problems whatsoever. In fact, my mother almost threw away a check for $18,000. When my father died, I had never seen a flag ceremony like you see on TV for the military. Okay. He was a Silver Beaver in the Boy Scout, which is the third highest award you can get in scouting. And I was a scout for a minute, you know. I was in the YMCA, and that's one of the anecdotes I love to talk about. But
well, how many years have you been in the industry? I know you've been there quite a while.
Well, here's the problem. When I was young, there were no real role models that were in, especially black males. When I went to Michigan State, I think I started out in sociology and then psychology and so forth. And I finally came up for air. I had a counselor that was more interested in publishing than perishing. Publish or perish is what they said. He didn't counsel. He was my counselor. So I heard about an Indian professor that was very interesting and humorous and kind. Didn't mind if you sat in on his class. I went to his class. I felt his humanity. He said he had an open door policy. I said, I'm going to test this. I went to his door and I knocked on the door. I said, I need a few minutes of your time to help me decide what to do in my life. And he said, he didn't blink. He said, come in. He asked me the basic newspaper questions, who, what, where, when, how, and why, what he interested in. He changed my major in less than 15 minutes to business administration. So my actual background and training is to run a General Motors plant, which I don't particularly like cars. Okay. And I'm enough of a generalist, so I know just enough to know if I've got an engineering problem, a safety problem, a morale problem. See where I'm going? That's my background. But I've also always been an artist. I used to travel with a large gospel group called the Earl Nelson Negro Spiritual Singers. Okay. It was one of the first black and white gospel groups in Michigan. And I didn't travel a lot with them because I was so young. I was a prodigy. And I used to write and deliver very moving poetry, much like the last poets, but without the profanity. And I remember one time I was in an auditorium and I was feeling the anger of the 60s and all that kind of stuff. And I forgot that the microphone was in the podium.
Okay.
And I said something about, I'd like to be free, or I can't even think of the poem I know so well. I'm getting tired. When I said I'm getting tired, I slammed on the podium for emphasis, forgetting the mic, and it sounded like a gunshot. And the whole audience stirred. I never forget that. I asked for nothing which is of mine to see the sunrise, watch it shine. I hope someday I shall be free. That's what happened. You know. Now I wrote that when I was 10 years old. I wrote 3 songs that I sent to Motown in Detroit. And be damned if they didn't combine 2 of them into one, and then use the other one. Those songs were on the air within, I don't think it was 60 days. And so I was very bitter. And the reason I know for sure they were my songs, I also wanted to be a detective when I was a kid. And I studied...
now that you mentioned that, it's been said about you that you have a niche market. I mean, politicians is kind of the main thrust of what you've interviewed over the years. I mean, you've interviewed quite a few people, from business owners to...
From Halle Berry to President Clinton. Yeah.
But
now
it's been kind of recognized as the conversation started that they seem to identify you with a lot of the politicians.
And that's because I'm jumping all around, but I was very interested in television, not so much radio. I used to listen to The Shadow, I'm dating myself, all those kind of things. And I was fascinated by a program called Omnibus, hosted by Sir Alistair Cook. And it's probably unusual, even strange, that a young kid would like a program which is called a magazine format, meaning that every 5 minutes they had a different topic, like you're turning a page. And I said to myself, someday I'll produce a television show like Sir Alistair Cook, the high point in television. I think television's gone down ever since. So anyway, somehow I found out at about 10 years old that we were having the first television station open up, WGIM, which was NBC affiliate. I requested, demanded that my parents take me. I'm clean as a board of hell.
And I like to just jump in there just for a moment just to say that congratulations on your transition into Comcast Television on Channel 102. That'll be airing, I think, sometime in July.
Well, we've actually dabbled in commercial television off and on. We were my wife, Wanda Carter, was the broker for the Honorable Louis Farrakhan's show that was on, I believe, Channel 3. But let me come back to this evolution. I met Lonesome George Goebel, who was a comedian, and he had a crew cut. I never forget. And I met the McGuire sisters. And McGuire sisters, to this day, I remember how nice they were, how beautiful they were, how nice they smelled, and how great they felt. They all gave me a big hug, because I was the only kid that I remember at this opening of this TV station. And so, like I said, in high school and junior high school, I had great favor. I ran for president of I think it was my junior high, and I didn't get the presidency. Was it junior high? But I did represent my class. And someone said, you know, like you said, you have a knack for government and politics and meeting people. We're going to nominate you as a representative to a group called YAC, the Youth Advisory Council for Western Michigan. And I went to that group, and believe it or not, although I wasn't the president of my high school class, I became the president of the organization that represented all of the students in private, parochial schools, even boys training schools, so forth, for the whole of Western Michigan. So in the tender ages of 14, 15, I was traveling all over the country on government vouchers. They would send you a thing that was a cross between a purchase order and a ticket, and you could just take it to any bus, train, or rail station, and the only question they asked is, what flight do you want? Or what train? And I was just...
Which brings me to this question. You've interviewed a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who would you like to interview? Who haven't you interviewed that you would like to interview?
I don't really feel there are too many people that are beyond my grasp. I tell you, someone I'd like to talk to again, I never really interviewed him, was Isaac Hayes. One of my best friends when I was a real young guy in the business world was a young man by the name of Anzi Horn Jr. His father, Anzi Horn Sr., was a musical director for the Barcades and then later for Isaac Hayes. So I spent time from time to time on the road because my friend, the only way he could see his daddy from the time he was a little guy, was to go on, if it was in 100 miles, to travel, to get on a bus, plane, and train. So we did that. We were playing the corporate game, and you have to measure your sideburns, and we could be completely free, open shirts, cigars, and Isaac Hayes would rent his manager would rent a Cadillac or a Lincoln in every town, and sometimes we just run errands. We'd go pick up drumsticks or booze, special booze, or take somebody's girlfriend home. But for some reason, Isaac Hayes, believe it or not, is one of the people that I'd like to interview. Now, Wanda and I, through Reverend Barr, who's on Channel 25, got a call to interview James Brown. Now, that was one of the highlights of our lives. And it was such a sweet situation that they have an orchestra pit in the Joliet Rialto. But James Brown has his own band on stage. So the pit was up. They had chairs for VIP. So we weren't in the front row. We were in the chairs right in front of the stage. I spent most of my time with the elbows on the stage looking at his lovely singers and dancers, and then he had some,
so the greatest entertainer.
Yeah, and he was doing all this, but it was deep. He had a sense of, I don't know how to put it, peace, and he was very religious. Now, he was a wild one probably when he was young, but I think he knew he was going to die. I really did, because here's what happened. He stopped the whole show to pray for the troops. He brought his girlfriend, Tommy Ray, who had bore him a beautiful son, young son, and she was out of sight. I don't know what it was, maybe This Bitter Earth, some song like that, Larry. But audience, he said, we're going to change the pace. And they'd been playing Living in America and jumping around. And she came out in a $4,000 glittering gown. And she's a beautiful woman with long red hair. She's a Caucasian woman. And she did what they call a biopic. Sort of like when, what's his name, did Muhammad Ali, the actor, Will Smith. See, it's one thing to act like somebody. It's still another one when you become them. This girl went into almost like a trance and gnarled her hands, and she could sing. And the audience got so silent it was scary. She became, I can't remember the famous singer, but she became her. I know some of the Dale, some of the Shylights, some of the Impressions, I know Iceman Butler, who has a great sense of humor, by the way. He keeps you laughing. I used to date a lady that was dating Gene Chandler. That's how I met Gene. She decided we should meet. And so I know entertainment. My cousin, Lenny Williams, used to sing. He sings the begging song. And I love you. Oh, that's my cousin.
Talent in the family, huh?
Well, somewhere, I get my ability to speak more from my mother and my acuity and the scientific look at things from my daddy, who was a scientist, But for some reason, I'd like to do Isaac Hayes. And, like I said, I don't really feel anybody's out of reach. We have quite a reputation. My wife put together a website that Google upgraded to 137 engines. I'm not really impressed a whole lot by people. I haven't done Reverend Jackson lately. I've done small things with him. Nor have I done Minister Farrakhan on TV. We've done it on radio. And I'm proud that, you know, we are a five-way. We do trips. We have television, radio, internet, publications, and other kinds of specialized things. And so it makes me proud that I'm versatile, you know. And I've had as clients 19 of Chicago's aldermen. So I'm one shy of 2/5 of the city council.
That's
you know,
great.
the late Cecil Partee was a client of mine. I learned a lot. And on the west side, Alderman Sol Cola, you know what I'm talking about. He was quite a rascal on the 24th Ward.
Rick Henry?
His father.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I learned a lot from his father. I represented him, and believe me, keeping him pristine in the press and working out things.
Bill Henry.
Bill Henry, yeah. Wild Bill Henry.
Mm-hmm.
But he was one of the brightest men. Now, Wild Bill Henry, to give you a little anecdote, whenever he had a relationship with the mayor, so he had 2 executive protection elite bodyguards. Mm-hmm. How he got them, why he had them, I don't know. But that's the way that I could communicate. He'd be out on somebody's boat for hours at a time, and I had their pager numbers, and I would page 555 to say, call me back on land. Okay. And then if it was something urgent, I'd say 6 5s or 9 5. That was our code, you know.
Well, we're sitting here talking, just to break in there a little bit, with Morgan Carter. The conversation
The world's
started.
conversation.
The world's conversation.
And let me tell you why I say that. I was with Cliff Kelly, who's a good friend of mine. I tease him because I say he followed me everywhere I went. I had a show on GCI where I was a summer replacement for a young lady that had a show, and she helped me meet Dave Winfield, by the way. And then I've been with V103, you know, and I think he got a little too controversial for V103. And of course, I was a pioneer with WVON. I brought television kinds of concepts to WVON, especially covering politics. Mm-hmm. And politics is about all people want to talk about. That's how I got into doing politics. Ricky Hendon and the other brother, I cannot think of his name, he's kind of disappeared. They were 2 phenomena. They were under Harold Washington as reform committeemen. Now that's an oxymoron if I ever heard one, because a committeeman audience is an elected official in terms of party, a Republican or a Democrat. All right. And by the way, in this city, a alderman is supposed to be nonpartisan. That's the biggest joke I ever heard. Right? The Democratic committeemen usually choose the Republican committeemen just so everybody got a job. You know, and make that man to poll. So, and then Danny Davis, forever I'm indebted to Congressman Davis, because he was the first large politician that I had access to, and I seem to feel his soul. The Urban League I owe a big debt to. This is just after I met who now is my wife. The Urban League, through the late Dr. I can't think of his name, allowed me to tape my shows there. And I was working with Miss Lateef, Naima Lateef, and her and her husband had written Slavery, there's some connection, and had a newspaper. Anyway.
Well, if we had, because we're coming to the close of our show.
Have really already?
Gone almost.
I don't feel like
so what we would like to talk about is this one last thing. Mm-hmm. And what would you like for the audience to know about Morgan Carter that they don't know? And maybe some of the future things that Morgan might be doing?
Well, someone always told me that you can lead by serving. I consider what I do a ministry. I'm not super pious, but I've been given the opportunity. I know that through the Reverend Henry Souls and his wife, that one of the ways that I was complaining I couldn't tithe, he said, you tithe in with your time. So my gift to the community is to use my gifts and skills and the access to media, which has just fallen to our feet to help nonprofits and small businesses and individuals to get some of the same exposure that a McDonald's can buy or General Motors. That I feel is my way. We use it to offset discrimination. I did a lot of that when I was on WVON. As I said, I risked my life because we were threatened for talking about a certain topic. police actually arrested people off the air for various offenses. So it wasn't always a calm thing, you know. So in the future, I hope to do more with the satellite, to do more with the internet, and to teach young people, as my wife's engaged, these technical areas, and really to do bigger, better, certainly to make more money, but to be more of a national media group as opposed to a local one.
Well, we're sitting here with Morgan Carter, the world's conversation starter.
And but the minister taught us that nothing that we do is local. Nothing that we do is local. And that's why, one of the reasons I adopt, I see you laughing, that's one of the reasons that I use the world's conversation starter. And I did do, seriously.
Well, that name,
for
you
the
got it
Million Man March. Anyway, but anyway, if we had another 4 hours, we could finish.
Hey, we're just getting started. I'm already feeling good about it.
All right.
But we're going to end it for the audience, and you'll be able to see Mr. Carter on the show at Comcast 102. You can look to see him and more interviews with him. This is only the beginning. I mean, we just scratched the surface.
And don't forget Omnibus Roundtable on Wednesday nights at 9:30 and various times for the Morgan Memo News Talk TV show.
And I always enjoy talking with Morgan, being with Morgan, and now we're finding out more about him. And so, again, we want to leave you with these words. Peace.
Thursdays are all so sad. To tell you that